What's up everyone, Johnny from Jettle here. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can get full marks in section 1 of the HSC English exam. And I'm going to be breaking down every question of the 2024 HSC paper to do that. I'm going to do it sentence by sentence, showing you exactly how I would answer each question in a time-pressured exam when you've only got a few minutes to think about each text. So let's look at section 1 of the 2024 HSC paper here. Now, first things first, we want to do the paper in order. We don't want to do the essay first. If we do the essay first, it means we've effectively wasted that 10 minutes reading time to read through those texts that you've never seen before. You don't want to have to spend another 10 minutes halfway through the exam rereading them. So we're going to do the section 1 first, then we'll do the essay in the context of this exam. Now, if I'm looking at this section 1 paper in the exam, the first thing I'm actually going to look at is the marks for each question, because that tells me how much time I need to spend on each of them, how many sentences I actually need to write for each question. As I look at the marks in the brackets for each of these questions, I'm visualizing the structure. I'm thinking 3 marks, 3 sentences. In my head, I know I have to have a topic sentence and 2 pieces of evidence that I analyze in relation to the question. That's enough for me to get the 3 marks before I then move on. If you don't visualize the structure, if you don't know how many sentences equal that amount of marks, then you're going to overcompensate and write too much. That's just going to take up valuable time from the other questions. It's especially important for 3 to 4 markers to stay disciplined and not overwrite. You just need to write the same amount of sentences for the mark. So I'm noticing here that we've got a 3 marker for question 1, we've got a 4 marker for question 2, we've got a 5 marker for question 3, we've got a 3 marker for question 4, and we've got a 5 marker for question 5. So half of the marks from this section 1 are coming from 2 of those questions. Obviously, they need a little bit more time. The way we give them more time is not to spend too much time on the 3 and 4 markers. And we can see there are 2 3 markers. So in my head already, just as reading time starts, I've looked at the mark allocations and I've now mapped out how much time, roughly speaking, I want to spend even analyzing the texts. As soon as I can find 2 techniques for this 3-mark question, and as soon as I kind of get the vibe of the question and I have at least one specific point to make for a topic sentence, I'm moving on. I'm going to the next question. We only need to stay on that text for as long as it takes to understand one key point in relation to the question, which will be our topic sentence, and then 2 sentences of analysis. Same for the 4 marker. You just need 1 topic sentence and 3 sentences of analysis. So we need to stay disciplined with that so that we have enough time for the 5 markers. Now, after you look at the mark allocations for each question, we then want to look at the actual question, and we want to identify the 1 or maybe 2 key terms in the question that are really the focus of the question. The key word or key words that you want to be using in every sentence of your response so that you make it explicitly clear to the marker that you are engaging with this question. For 3 and 4 markers in particular, there's often only 1 key term that's really in there. And I don't mean the word how, I don't mean the word explain. I'm talking about a key word, a key term that is probably drawn from the rubric for human experiences, because that's where all of the questions come from. And it's a word that you need to expand on and use throughout the response. So let's have a look at question 1 here. It's a non-fiction extract. Usually people don't like non-fiction extracts because it's harder to find techniques, but we'll be fine. How does green invite the reader to consider aspects of the human sense of smell? Okay, what's the key word? What's the word that just jumped out there as quite a unique word? Smell, right? But then people say, oh, it's how, it's aspects. No, it's none of that. It's smell. All we're looking for is things about smell that are represented in the text. And I've only got to find 1 overall point. I've only got to come up with 1 idea that I think is represented about smell, and then provide 2 examples with 2 slightly different points explaining those 2 examples. So that's all I need to do for that one. Fantastic. Question 2, analyze how Vincent connects the significance of measurement to human experience. So this is a 4 marker, 4 sentences, 1 topic sentence, plus 3 sentences of analysis. A sentence of analysis just means a technique, a quote, and an effect. And here, the key word is clearly measurement. Human experience? No, the whole thing is human experiences, the whole paper, the whole module. The key word there is clearly measurement. So already we can see smell and measurement as those 2 respective key terms in those questions. So for question 3, compare how text 3 and text 4, so this one requires 2 texts, so I have to look at those with that in mind, Offer a perspective on the ways individuals perceive their surroundings. Okay, so there's no like one specific word, surroundings you could argue, but like this idea of perceiving surroundings. So perceiving surroundings in my head, I'm like, okay, that's what I'm thinking about, how individuals perceive surroundings. That's like the key focus. So I'll be paying attention to the perception of some kind of surrounding. Great. Question 4, analyze how Wilson represents the relationship between discomfort and joy. There's 2 key words, 2 clear key terms. Now for question 5, assess how Diaz's use of language illuminates the dynamics within the Brevoort family. Might be saying that wrong. Okay, use of language. Language is mentioned specifically here. Now, even if it just said assess how Diaz illuminates, we would still be talking about language features and techniques. So because it actually says the word language specifically, we do want to address that at least use that word in the topic sentence. And good news, that is it. So let's go through those now. I'll be talking about the structure and how to answer each of them. So using Jedi here to answer the questions. The first question is, how does Green invite the reader to consider aspects of the human sense of smell? The key word of this question is smell. We need to think about how smell is represented. What is it about smell that's so important in this text? And it's only 3 marks. So 3 marks equals 3 sentences. The first sentence is a topic sentence, followed by 2 sentences of analysis. So let's see if we can quickly pick up on those things. And again, I'm putting myself in the position of a student doing the exam. We just need to quickly scan and find things and then move on. So, smell is one of the last realms where virtual reality still feels deeply virtual. Okay, the start of a non-fiction text is often quite important, especially in this case, because it will immediately give you a sense of what the point is in the piece, like what's the key idea in the piece. Here it says, smell is one of the last realms where virtual reality still feels deeply virtual. So already by saying smell is one of the last realms, it's saying smell is unique. If you're the last of something, that's quite rare, that's quite special. So already I have a sense of what I'm going to say in the topic sentence. I'm going to say it's unique, and it's talking about it in the context of virtual reality. So this is just what's quickly going through my mind straight away as I read that. I haven't even read anything else at this point, and yet I already am keeping that idea in my head. We just need to find one specific insight to flesh out a topic sentence, and then we just need to find 2 examples with different techniques to back that up. Recently, I found myself at a theme park riding a VR roller coaster that felt breath-stillingly real. Okay, alarm bells. Recently, I found myself at a theme park. Already in my head, I'm thinking anecdote. They're providing an anecdote. They're providing a story, a personal account of something that happened to them recently. Okay, so an anecdote, that can be used as a technique. So we keep that in the back of our minds here. Again, we'll only use it if it's going to relate to the sense of smell part of the question, like if that connects to it in some way. But the fact that it's an anecdote can help personalize the representation. It can provide a more relatable experience or a more relatable representation. And notice here as well, as I read through each sentence, I consciously try to find techniques. You need to look at the text actively. You can't just read through and feel like, oh yeah, I'm following. No, it's like, what technique was just in that sentence? As soon as I find 2 techniques, and I know that those 2 techniques can be used to say something slightly different because you don't want to repeat the same points, then I'm good to go and I can get off this text. So we need to be very deliberate about it. You don't need to worry about understanding every single sentence of the text. A lot of students have this problem where they think, oh, I don't know what's going on. I have no idea. I was just reading and nothing was going in. It doesn't matter. Just zoom in on a couple of parts, see if you can find a technique, and see if you can then take what's there and relate it to a key term in the question. It wasn't just that falling felt like falling and turning felt like turning. I even felt the mist on my face as I flew through ocean spray. Okay, so what's it saying here? They went to a theme park. Things felt so real in this virtual reality experience. The key thing is after it. But that water did not smell like the ocean. It smelled like this room deodorizer I'd used in high school called Spring Rain. Okay, let's pause there. This is where it's getting to the crux of the question. It's the first time it's said smell other than in that first sentence. And the key thing is, it's saying in the virtual reality experience, the fake smell wasn't like the real smell. So there's a clear juxtaposition here. There's a contrast, right? There's a contrast between the smell of the ocean and the smell of a room deodorizer. So straight away in my head, I'm thinking, okay, smell is this unique experience. I think we've already got the topic sentence actually. And you need to do this actively again. You don't have to wait till the end to formulate your idea. It's always good to read through a text once very quickly, superficially, and then look at it a little bit closer. I always do 2 reads. But here, I've already got a sense of a key idea I could make out, and I can probably already see 2 pieces of evidence with the anecdote and the contrast now to write the whole response. But the key thing is, smell is this unique sense that can't be replicated easily by artificial means, by virtual reality. It's not easy to artificially recreate the human sense of smell, and that makes it unique. Great, that's a topic sentence right there for you. We're going to write it in a second. The second thing we can see here is, now that I'm thinking about that idea, I want to make sure I've got two pieces of evidence to say something about it. Here we can see again, there's a contrast, a juxtaposition or a contrast. You don't need to overcomplicate the techniques, but you do need a technique. A contrast between the smell of the ocean and the smell of room deodorizer. So that juxtaposition between the ocean and room deodorizer clearly emphasizes the distinction, the difference between a virtual smell and a real smell, proving that smell is a unique human sense that is difficult to emulate. Okay, great, we've got it. That's our sub-point, first sub-point. I just kind of spoke out the technique, and again, this is what I do in my head when I'm in the exam. I'm kind of finding the topic sentence. I've filled in that first slot because it's 3 sentences for a 3-marker. I've already filled in that topic sentence as I just spoke it out. I found a contrast between ocean and room deodorizer. That's good enough as a technique. You don't need to be fancy with any of this. I'm now just going to fast forward to the last paragraph because I like to find somewhere at the beginning and the end to analyze, because you can often get a different point, a different insight that still relates to the topic sentence and the question, but it means you're not going to repeat yourself by finding a technique straight after the first one that we just found. So going all the way to the bottom paragraph, this is literally what I do, especially if you feel like you couldn't understand everything. Just zoom in somewhere at the start and the end that you understand. Humans, meanwhile, smell like the exhalations of the bacteria that colonize us, right? We smell like exhalations of the bacteria that colonize us. If you don't understand what that's saying, it's basically just saying we smell bad. A fact we go to extraordinary lengths to conceal. It's saying humans like to conceal their real smell, not only via soap and perfume, but also in how we collectively imagine the human scent. If you had an artificial intelligence read every novel ever written, and then, based on those stories, guess the human odor, the AI would be spectacularly wrong. Okay, so it's really emphatic language there, spectacularly wrong. In our stories, people smell like vanilla, lavender, and sandalwood. Okay, that's interesting. So I like that one. I like just short, clear sentences where I can easily find a technique. Now, the technique here is olfactory imagery. Olfactory imagery is imagery that is to do with smell. And if you didn't pick up on that, you can just say imagery, but it is better if you can say olfactory imagery. Again, not a huge deal in section 1 to not go super specific or be super sophisticated with the techniques, but always better if you can, especially given this question is about a sense of smell. It is going to be impressive to the marker if you know that a sense of smell is to do with olfactory imagery. Olfactory is spelt like old factory. I always think about an old factory, and then I remove the D, and that's the word for the sensory imagery that is to do with smell. We know that visual imagery is to do with things that you can see, but when it describes here that people smell like vanilla, it's describing a smell. It's actually called olfactory imagery, or old factory without the D. So good if you can say that. We'll go with that. So we got olfactory imagery there. So what's the point here? Because humans like to pretend that they smell better than they do, the artificial intelligence that's interpreting those stories is going to have a false idea. It's going to have the wrong idea about how we smell. It's going to think in real life we smell better than we actually do. So that's why smell is really hard to replicate, because we don't even replicate it authentically ourselves. So we've clearly got a more nuanced point coming out from that one. So if we can say anything like that, amazing, 3 out of 3. Let's type it up now. Okay, so starting the topic sentence, never overcomplicate the sentence starter. How does Green invite the reader to consider aspects of the human sense of smell? Green invites the reader to consider the uniqueness. I said that was something that stood out. It was the last kind of sense it said that is hard to duplicate in the virtual world. So we don't need to be too clever here. Green invites the reader to consider the uniqueness. I'm still adding that. Uniqueness wasn't mentioned in it. So I'm giving the ultimate aspect to consider the uniqueness of the human sense of smell. Now, how is it unique? It's not enough to just say uniqueness. That adding that one word isn't quite enough to give your specific insight to tick the box. But what is going to be impressive is if you can say how it's unique or why it's significant that it's unique. Now, it's significant that it's unique because it is difficult to replicate artificially. That's the point. It says virtual reality is not good at replicating the human smell. So we literally just have to say that. Green invites the reader to consider the uniqueness of the human smell by suggesting that it is difficult sounds better than hard, but that's fine, difficult to replicate we could say in virtual reality, but I'm just going to extrapolate that a little bit and say artificially, or I'm actually going to put that before artificially replicate. Now, I'm setting this up on Jedi so that you can easily see with the self-assessment tool where the marks are actually coming from. So to get the mark for the topic sentence here, we need to actually provide something specific about the sense of smell. We not only need to say that it's unique, but we also need to say how it's unique. Well, it's unique, and notice that I'm asking myself the mini question there, how, because that forces you to say something specific. The human sense of smell is unique, as represented in the text, because it is difficult to artificially replicate. Okay, that's it. That's your topic sentence done. As long as you can say one specific insight by asking yourself questions like what type, how, why, so what in relation to the key term, then you will get the mark for that sentence. Now we need our 2 sentences of analysis. So we're gonna zoom in on that one sentence that we looked at the start where it was contrasting the smell of the ocean with the smell of the room deodorizer, because that is clearly distinguishing between other senses and the sense of smell, saying that that one is the most tricky to duplicate. So let's do that. Now you could mention the fact that it's done within an anecdote. That would be kind of like a bonus point, not a bonus mark necessarily, but it's not necessary. So I'm just gonna do the bare minimum here. I'm not even gonna mention the anecdote if I don't have to. So we can just say the contrast between the ocean and room deodorizer in the virtual, we wanna say when that is, in the virtual reality experience. So started with the technique, then brought in the quotes, highlights, and you can just use any verb here. I like to use the spiced verbs. Spiced for suggests, portrays, illustrates, conveys, emphasizes, depicts, or demonstrates. So spiced gives you 6 go-to verbs to use. I'm not using one of them now, but I will now that I've said that. Emphasizes the inconsistency between natural and artificial smells as opposed, now I'm just adding this, as opposed to other senses. Okay, that's enough. I'm just showing the bare minimum to get the 3 out of 3 here. So as long as we have a technique, we've said contrast, that's fine. You have to have a technique, but it doesn't need to be a fancy one. Between the smell of the ocean, this is where we're quoting, and room deodorizer in the virtual reality experience, emphasizes, that's our verb, the inconsistency between natural and artificial smells as opposed to other, I might even make it other human senses because it says the human sense of smell. Okay, so that is showing how it's unique, right? Now we could say emphasizes the inconsistency between natural and artificial smells as opposed to other human senses that are easier to recreate, okay? So just kind of fleshing that out a little bit to make sure it's specific enough, but we're only saying one thing here about it, that there's a contrast between ocean and room deodorizer to show that it's not easy to replicate that, which is what we've said in the topic sentence. But we need to make sure we don't just repeat the topic sentence. We need to say something specific to these quotes, which is about a natural smell like the ocean. Ocean equals nature. That's why I'm saying natural, and artificial smells because of the room deodorizer. In terms of the link to the question, it's saying it is difficult to emulate. So we're just going to say the inconsistency between natural and artificial smells is something to consider about the human sense of smell, that they aren't the same, they are different. And we have this little bit to extend that if we wanted to. But right there is a link to the question. Great, so we've got our second mark. And what's the last thing? What's going to get us to the 3 out of 3? So remember, we're zooming into the end of the piece here because we want to make a slightly different point that still connects to the question. It tells us another aspect of human smell. A simple sentence starter like moreover, then you can go straight back into the technique. I always start with the technique because it forces you to get straight into the analysis versus storytelling and describing and waffling on, wasting time and not getting marks. So let's get straight to it. Moreover, the use of, if you don't want to just say the technique, the use of olfactory imagery. And olfactory imagery, as we said, is imagery to do with smell. If you didn't know olfactory on the day, you could just say imagery, but you need to have a technique. The use of olfactory imagery. So in this case, I won't say in because the start of the quote has the word in. In our stories, people smell like vanilla, lavender, and sandalwood. And we don't need to include the full stop at the end here unless we were making a point about it being a short sentence or something like that, which would be short syntax. That's possible. But because we're not doing that, I'm just going to leave out the full stop so that we can continue the sentence. Moreover, the use of olfactory imagery. In our stories, people smell like vanilla, lavender, and sandalwood. What does that mean? It says, remember, in our stories, we're making it seem like people smell better than they actually do. So we have this kind of romanticized version or idea about how we smell, which then makes it really difficult for the artificial intelligence to duplicate a real smell, because we don't even come up with real smells. So that's the point we want to make here. So again, thinking about spiced, suggests, portrays, whichever one is best suited here. We can say demonstrates, or actually let's just go with conveys how people, not going to overcomplicate it, conveys how people romanticize. Now, maybe you wouldn't think of that word on the day, maybe you would, but if you didn't, you just want to communicate the idea that people will make themselves smell better than they actually do, or we represent smell in a different way. We romanticize it. It's not realistic. Conveys how people romanticize the way we smell, thus giving artificial intelligence a false sense of reality. There we go. Okay. We've extended that idea a little bit, but the key thing here is that we're saying that people romanticize is where we're getting the marks here. We're romanticizing the way we smell, and that gives artificial intelligence a false sense of reality. So this is further explaining why it's difficult to replicate this smell. So both of these clearly connect to the question, but you can see that I'm really focused on the idea of smelling like vanilla and lavender. These things smell so good. That's a romantic idea. So that romantic word is clearly connected to the quote, and that helps me distinguish it from the other piece of analysis that I already did above. If you just focus on the words of the quote and think, what do they actually mean? Then you're able to avoid repeating the same points. But you can see here all of the different elements: technique, quote, effect, and then the effect clearly links to the question because it mentions smell. Notice how every sentence here actually mentions the word smell. Don't shy away from the key word of the question. Make it easy for the marker to see that you're engaging directly with the question. Hey everyone, it's Jonny from Jettle, and if you want to check out state rank examples, band 6 analysis, step-by-step guides to constructing the perfect essays, craft of writing pieces, whatever it is that you need for your English exams, then go to jettle.com. We've put everything in one place for you so that you don't need to look any further to get everything you need to succeed in your exams. And if you want to submit a draft and get expert marking, or you want to use our marking tools to get specific suggestions on how you can improve your essays, your creative writing pieces, anytime, anywhere, make sure you sign up to Jedi. It's less than $10 per week. Okay, so I'm gonna move faster and faster through these. I'm trying to just outline all of the principles. We pay attention to the marks. That gives us our structure. We use the key word of the question in every sentence. We only need to have one specific idea in our topic sentences, but we need to make sure it truly does expand on the question, and you can ask yourself questions like what type, how, why, so what to do that. And then with your evidence, to make sure you're not repeating the same points, you firstly look at different parts of the text that you understand well. Even if you don't understand 80% of the text, find a line from the beginning of the text that makes sense to you, and that also has a technique, and then find a line somewhere at the end of the text that has something that makes sense to you, and they will likely represent slightly different points in relation to the question. Great. And secondly, when you do analyze those two different sections, in this case for the 3 marker, then make sure that you zoom in on a couple of the words of the actual quote. Think about words that relate to the words of the quote, for instance, synonyms, and then try and use those related terms in the explanation of what that evidence means. That will help you be really specific and also avoid repeating the same generic point in both of your examples. Okay, moving on to question 2, analyze how Vincent connects the significance of measurement to human experience. What's the key word in the question? Measurement. It's very clear. Don't get it confused. We're going to use measurement a lot. We're going to use measurement in every single sentence. Maybe not measurement, maybe measure, measured, but we have to have a derivative of that word in there. Not a synonym, the actual word. Make it easy for the marker to reward you. So, 4 marker, 4 sentences. First sentence is a topic sentence followed by 3 sentences of analysis. So, how do we come up with a topic sentence quickly? What I would do typically is quickly read or scan the text to get a sense of the gist of it. If I had to put this down to one thing generally that it's about, what is it about, right? And it can just be anything that you take away from it. So I would skim through the text. I would think, is this positive? Is it negative? Like, which way is it going? Is it a kind of really depressing text? Is it optimistic? I just try and first of all get a sense of the direction from a positive and negative angle. I never want to use the words positive and negative, but I like to first of all figure out what direction it's going in emotionally. And then I like to think, what's the gist of it? What's like one key term that kind of relates to what it's about? And that's gonna help shape that topic sentence for me. And then of course, I'm gonna find 3 examples, ideally in slightly different sections of the text, based on the parts of the text that I truly understand best, that I can find a technique for, and that clearly relate to the question. Because you might see a technique in part of the text, but you don't know how it relates to the question specifically. So you need to pick good evidence. All right, so just quickly zooming in on a couple of key parts here. And of course you can pause the video and read the text yourself. You can go into Nessa and have a look at this paper and look at it more closely. But things that I'm kind of picking up on as if I'm in the exam straight away reading it. The very first measurement, like the first word or first melody, is lost to time, impossible to localize and difficult even to imagine. So the language here is quite sophisticated, lost to time, impossible to localize. It's like, what's going on here? Right, okay, I don't get it, you don't get it, who cares? Let's move on. Yet, it was a hugely significant act. What was a hugely significant act? The very first measurement. Okay, so someone took a measurement of something, it was a significant act, another addition to that nest of primeval consciousness that grew in the brains of our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago, and that would eventually set us apart from the other animals of the plain. Okay, so I always like to try and find something in the first couple of sentences in a text. I like to just get that first technique out of the way. So as we read through this, we're going to try and come up with that general idea, that general topic sentence, but already just scanning through the first couple of sentences, I've tried to locate something that I think I can find a technique for and that I think I understand, and I think, okay, I get how that could connect to the significance of measurement. So what I liked here, what stood out to me, because maybe, like me, if you might be in the same position where the first bit kind of went over your head, I can see that it's important because it's saying it's like the first word or first melody, that we could look at that. But something that stood out more to me was that this act of measurement grew in the brains of our ancestors. There's kind of this imagery, a bodily imagery, like almost cerebral, if you could think of that. Cerebral, bodily, because it's to do with the brain. Bodily imagery. So straight away, it grew in the brains of our ancestors. That is an image there. And the reason that stood out to me is because it's like, it's going all the way back to our ancestors. So straight away, I'm thinking, okay, it grew in the brains of our ancestors. Maybe that's metaphorical, but more importantly, for me, it's just this kind of bodily image or this cerebral image of the measurement kind of growing in the brains. And then I'm also thinking about the ancestors, and I'm thinking, what relates to that? Let's think about how we can break down that effect really quickly, because a lot of students struggle with actually saying something specific about the evidence. They can find a technique, but they don't know how to avoid a generic explanation of it, just repeating the question at the end of the sentence. So I'm thinking ancestors, I'm thinking evolution. So I'm like, okay, this is interesting. It's providing this evolutionary scale, this evolutionary perspective to it. That's pretty significant. It's telling me that measurement was relevant for our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's almost like this hyperbole going on. And for me, I think this is a really good point, because I know that with ancestors, to me, that triggers the word evolution. I just found like a synonym or a related word, ancestors, hundreds of thousands of years ago, evolution. That was the connection I made. So now I think, okay, measurement is significant because it has had evolutionary implications. It's like, bang, got it. That's the effect for one of my pieces of analysis, already done. I had to think about it a little bit there. That's why you have reading time to think about it. But a lot of people waste reading time. This is really key if you can understand this. A lot of people waste reading time literally trying to just get through every text, trying to read everything, to be like, yes, I read everything in the 10 minutes. No, it's not about that. It's about actually pausing at certain parts, thinking about, can I find a technique there? Does that make sense? Do I understand that part? Like, do I understand this one line here that I've paused on for this video on? I'm pausing here and chewing up valuable minutes of reading time or seconds of reading time because this is the most valuable thing you can do. You're slowly accumulating the marks mentally during reading time versus just trying to read through everything for the sake of it. So we've paused here, we've found a connected term, and now we're going to continue, and I'm kind of going to scan the rest of it and then pause at bits that I feel I can understand. That's how you can get full marks in this. It's not by trying to understand every single line and then rereading, oh, what's going on, what's going on? No, get a sense of the gist of it. Yes, comprehension skills are important. You do need to be able to figure out roughly what it's about, but not in its entirety. You can just zoom in, find those specific parts, and you can still get full marks even if you don't understand the whole piece. That's the beauty of section 1. I often see the better students getting worse marks in section 1 and the more average students getting possibly 20 out of 20. I see that quite a lot because they don't overthink it. They just think, okay, I've got to find the technique, explain the effect. Whereas the better students will spend too much time trying to overanalyze, overcompensate with too many sentences. They're trying to read and understand the whole thing and freaking out if they don't, which then creates stress, and now you can't think clearly about anything else. So it's really important to keep this simple. Okay, moving on from that, if we just go forward a little bit, and I'm not going to go too far forward, actually, I'm going to go to the next sentence, because sometimes you can get a couple of things out of the way within a couple of sentences. I know I've said go and look at different sections so that they're making different points and you're not repeating yourself, but if you can find a couple of things at the beginning and then fast forward to somewhere later in the text for the next point, that's good as well, as long as you're not repeating yourself. So for measurement, like speech and play, is the cornerstone of cognition. Okay, so a couple of things there. For measurement, like speech and play. See how it's used the word like there? It's almost like a simile, but it's more an analogy. It's an analogy. The author here is drawing an analogy between measurement and speech and play. And the reason why that's really important, because if we quickly look at the question, it was analyze how Vincent connects the significance of measurement to human experience. So yes, measurement is the focus, but how is it connecting to human experience? Well, here, this stood out to me because it's connecting it to other aspects of the human experience. That measurement is like speech and play. And we all know that speech and play are fundamental. So by creating this analogy to other human experiences that are central, it's saying that measurement, like speech and play, is pivotal to your development. So it's created this analogy. It's saying that measurement is basically on the same pay grade as your ability to speak and play with others. So that's incredibly important, but it's helping me understand it by drawing an analogy to other human experiences that I know are important, okay? So that likening, that analogy is actually allowing me to better understand the importance because it's suggesting that it's absolutely pivotal to one's development. Okay, so it seems now we've already got two pieces of evidence that we can potentially use. We're getting a sense of what this is saying. It's saying measurement's pretty important, but the key thing is what is the specific insight that we're going to offer about that in terms of how this author is helping us connect the significance of measurement to human experience. And we're getting a sense here that he's creating analogies, he's going back in history, he's giving us a bit of a broader perspective. So we're already getting a sense now of what's happening. And what I want to do now though is skip forward. Imagine you kind of got the gist of it, you're scanning through this other bit. We've already got two techniques out of this first paragraph, so let's go down a little bit. I first began to realize the importance of measurement when writing about the redefinition of the kilogram as a journalist. I mean, yeah, it sounds pretty bland, doesn't it? But let's go on. I had traveled to Paris for the assignment and there interviewed scientists who had been working on the project for decades. Now, I might not use this one specifically, but just note that this author is saying that he interviewed scientists who had been working on the project. So this is creating a little bit of ethos, right? It's credibility. It's saying, hey, this is something, I'm writing about something here that scientists have looked at for a long time. So this is clearly important. So he's like backing up his point, but also creating credibility behind what he's saying because he's spoken to the experts. So it's like this shared endeavor to understand measurement because it's that fundamental. So you could talk about ethos here on this point and the fact that that's building credibility, but also highlighting that to understand measurement is a shared endeavor by experts, because it says scientists. So scientists equals experts. So just like that, you could create another sentence of analysis there. Now, what I'm going to do next is find that third piece of evidence, but I'm going to show you what I would do if I couldn't understand almost all of the text and I just had to rush to find something in the context of an exam. What I would do is I would go down to the bottom typically. I would find a couple of things from the top, then I would go straight down to the bottom. I'm going to go straight to the end and see if I can find some technique and then connect that with the question. So if I go right down to the bottom, it says, as I followed these breadcrumbs, I began to understand what an intellectual feast measurement truly is. What a banquet of historical, scientific, and sociological wonder. Okay, what do you notice about that? Breadcrumbs, feast, banquet. So there's like this extended food metaphor, right? And is that going to help you connect with the significance of measurement? Yes, because we can all understand food, because that's a primal human need. So by using imagery, by using food imagery, or you could even just say by using the metaphor of an intellectual feast, because it has the connotations of food or the direct connection to food. Because of that, it means that we're going to better understand what he means. It's an intellectual feast. Wow, this is food for the mind. Intellectual, mind, feast, food. So, and because it's a feast, it means there's like this abundance of it. So there's an abundance of value for the human mind in understanding measurement. See what we did there? We just looked at intellectual feast. A feast, there's a lot of things. There's an abundance, there's an excess. There's an abundance of value for the mind. Mind is intellectual. These are the kinds of, this is how I brainstorm it, and this is how I think about a specific effect to write. And then we connect that to significance, because that means that trying to understand measurement has a lot of significance for the intellect, right? It's food for the mind, food for the brain. Great, so now we've found that third piece. So let's just tie it all together. It's a 4-marker, so we've got our 3 pieces of evidence. Do we have a sense of the gist? Yes, seems like if I'm to pick between positive and negative, this guy is pretty positive. James Vincent, he's pretty positive about measurement, right? He's got this thing for measurement, awesome. It's definitely not negative. It's not saying measurement is stupid. It's saying measurement is great. It's a feast, it's a banquet. Just look at the words that are used. It's telling you the vibe of this piece. And that's important because we just need to find one idea that we can use for our topic sentence. So I know it's a positive perspective. I'm not going to say positive, but it puts me in the right direction. And clearly what this author has done is used a lot of relatable experiences and imagery, like the food imagery, like the analogy to speech, like the brain, the ancestors, relatable imagery and experiences to emphasize the value of measurement to human evolution, human development. I'll use one of those words. I don't want to repeat myself after it, but I think that we've kind of got to the point where that is the topic sentence point that we can make. So let's write that in. Okay, so remember 4 marks, 4 sentences. Now let's not overcomplicate the sentence start here. So let's just use Vincent. So we're going to start the sentence with Vincent. We're going to say Vincent represents the, we could say intellectual. We know that's going to come up in the last point based on the evidence that we just scanned through. But we can say represents the significance of measurement. We need to say what it's significant to. Remember, we always need to expand on the key word. You want to use the key word or key term of the question, which we are right now, but you can't stop there. Otherwise, you've just repeated the question. So you want to split up the key terms and elaborate on each part as you go. So Vincent represents the significance of measurement. Now time to expand to our human development. Now, how does he do it? By connecting it to relatable human experiences and imagery, okay? Now, this isn't you saying that imagery is the technique you're talking about. You should never list techniques, but I mean imagery in a broader sense. He's talking about all these relatable things like play, speech, the brain, ancestors. He's using the feast, right? I'm just thinking about all of that and thinking, okay, how can I generalize that for a topic sentence while still being specific enough to get the mark for the topic sentence? So this is my way of doing that. I think it's enough here to say it's the significance of measurement to our human development, but you could actually do a little bit better here by saying what type of significance. I always like to ask myself that mini question, what type, in relation to key terms, because it helps you put an adjective before the word, which means you're already expanding on it. So Vincent represents the intellectual significance of measurement, right? So, or timeless significance. Like some kind of adjective there just helps you go a little bit beyond the question. Try and do that as much as you can throughout your answers. Vincent represents the timeless significance, and I think that's fitting here because it talks about ancestors, timeless significance of measurement to our human development. So the key part of this question, where you're really going to get the marks, is a little bit because of the timeless significance of measurement. Remember, significance of measurement was already in the question, but then we say to our human development. The question didn't say that. So you're saying why it's significant. Again, why is it significant? You ask yourself that question, and then by answering it, you are able to provide that specific insight that goes beyond the question. And then of course, by connecting it to relatable human experiences imagery, that's also expanding because it's saying how, and it's relating to the connect part. So look at the parts that are highlighted there. That is how you go beyond the question and actually answer it with something specific. Now, in terms of our evidence, let's get those 3 sentences done. So for the first piece of evidence, we'll go with that brain image, right? So that was like a cerebral image, but let's go more basic, just a bodily imagery. That's to do with the body, right? You could argue with visceral as well, but not really. I think let's go with bodily. So start the sentences with the technique. It's just way easier to structure it. It's way more analytical. You're not gonna waffle on about things that aren't important, and you're not gonna story tell or describe. So it's gonna be more efficient, and it's gonna get you the marks sooner. So the visceral image or imagery grew in the brains of our ancestors. And we're just gonna have enough in this quote here to show the technique, grew in the brains. We're gonna keep the ancestors part in there, obviously, because our whole point is going to be about that it's growing in the brains of our ancestors. So that means that it's got this evolutionary significance, right? So let's go there. The bodily imagery conveys the evolutionary significance. Notice again how I'm using the word significance. I'm using the actual word of the question, but I'm saying what type, and I'm choosing the word evolutionary because it clearly relates to ancestors. So it's kind of like a 2-in-1 there, that I'm using a word that clearly connects to the quote, but it's also helping expand on the key word of the question. It conveys the evolutionary significance of measurement. And now that we've kind of said the main thing, which is that it's evolutionary, it's got an evolutionary significance, we do need to kind of say how or what we mean by that. So it's good just to break it down a little bit further here, because otherwise it might be a little bit superficial and not quite get the mark. So it conveys the evolutionary significance of measurement as it was central to our, again, we don't want to keep saying development. We said human development, so let's just say growth. You just look for synonyms, don't want to be repetitive, of course. Our growth as a species. Okay, great. It's still not that crazy long sentence, is it? A lot of people write way too much. So we've got our quote, and then we've got the clear link to the question, especially with evolutionary. Great, let's go to the next one. Just pause here. Okay, the second quote we wanted to use was the one about measurement being like speech and play. And it says, for measurement, like speech and play, is the cornerstone of cognition. Now that's a very definitive statement, isn't it? It says is, not might be, perhaps is. So that's high modality. I always like to think of MEST is best. M for modality, here it's high modality. Sometimes it's low modality if it said perhaps. E for emotive language, S for syntax. Syntax is sentence length, short sentences, long sentences, and you've got elongated syntax if it's a long sentence, and T for tone. MEST is best as backup techniques, guaranteed techniques that you'll find in any written text. So I'm always thinking about that as well. Here we've got the high modality with the word is. It's saying it is the cornerstone of cognition, which is a very authoritative statement, very definitive. All right, now for this next sentence, we're just gonna get straight into it. We can reuse the moreover thing. You can keep reusing sentence starters and connectors across your answers. That's the beauty of section 1. We're gonna say, moreover, the use of an analogy, technique, and high modality language. Second technique, you don't have to do that, but we're doing that because both of those were obvious enough, and we can get them in there. Again, I wouldn't do it if I was gonna use one of those techniques later, keep some in the bank, but it's all good in this case. For measurement, like speech and play is the cornerstone of cognition. So we get the essential part of the quote that clearly captures the analogy to speech and play, but also has the is the cornerstone of cognition, which is critical to the point we want to make. So we have to include all of that in our quote. Notice again how I just used the word in. You don't have to do these fancy transitions into the quote where it just flows, as I would recommend for your essays that you have time to prepare all of that for. This you can keep a lot more basic. And then you want to say, relates measurement to other fundamental human experiences. Can you see how this directly connects to the quote? Because the quote said like speech and play. So they're other human experiences, or they're other human attributes, right? So we could say attributes even, but this other fundamental human experiences is clearly connecting to the speech and play. Okay, so that's showing how it relates, which is part of the question because it says how does it connect? And it then says to emphasize its primary significance to our identity. So yes, we've got the word significance in there, but I'll just show you the expansion on the question here, more importantly, because it's one thing to use the keyword of the question, it's another to have that expansion. So have a look at the word primary. Simple one to add here, primary significance. I didn't want to say central significance because I used that above. And then I've said what it's significant to. And again, I didn't want to say to our development because that would repeat the question, but it's still something specific here because it says it's the cornerstone of cognition, cognitive, our brain, right? So I've just said our identity, but we could even say something even more directly relevant to cognition. I mean, have we said cerebral? I'm trying not to use vocabulary that might be less accessible. So I'm just doing identity, psychology, cognition, psychology, to our mental state. Actually, yeah, I like that. So mental state, because mental state, your mental state is linked to your cognition, how you think, right? Perfect. So that's 3 out of 4 marks achieved. Let's get the last one. We said we wanted to talk about the intellectual feast. We zoomed in on that quote right at the end. Even if we didn't understand everything in the middle of the text, doesn't matter. Don't waste your time. Scan through, try and find things in different sections that you understand, that you can find a technique for, and that you can link to the question. So in this case, finally, I like finally if it's a 4 marker, kind of wrap it up here. Finally, the metaphor of an intellectual feast. Right? And we said we came up with this nice explanation of this one as we were brainstorming, right? We said that intellectual feast is like food for the mind, because feast is food, intellectual's mind, but a feast is lots of food. So it's like an abundant source of nutrition for the mind, right? I can't remember exactly what we said, but something about abundant, right? So it conveys the power of, by the way, saying the power of is such a good little phrase to put in when you start an effect or even when you're starting a topic sentence, because it's going to force you to say something specific. You can't just end the sentence after I say the next word here. I can't just end it. It's the power of measurement, or understanding measurement here, conveys the power of understanding measurement to provide an abundance of, now I don't want to say intellectual, what about insight into the human condition? Because it's like, it's an intellectual feast. There's so much to understand, right? So let's use the word insight in connection with intellectual. Conveys the power of understanding measurement to provide an abundance of insight into the human experience. And if we want to really get that, how does it connect it to the human experience? We'll say the metaphor of an intellectual feast, let's say, connects with our, human need for food. If we wanted to do a really good effect here, finally, the metaphor of an intellectual feast connects with our human need for food to convey the power of understanding measurement to provide an abundance of insight into the human experience. We could go a lot deeper here with the food thing. Let's not overcomplicate it. We've got our technique, intellectual feast as the quote, and that connects with our human need for food. I mean, we're just being very clear about that in terms of, being specific. And then it's to convey the power of, remember that phrase, the power of, the value of. It's such a good setup phrase to go on to explain something specific, whether it's a topic sentence or an explanation. The power of, the value of, the ability for, the capacity for, the potential for. If you write down those 5, you can pretty much use them in every explanation and it will force you to do the right thing. So the power of understanding measurement to provide an abundance. I just want to highlight the specific things that are going to get the marks. An abundance of insight. An abundance of insight. Abundance because it's a feast. Insight because it's intellectual into the human experience. Okay, great. So there we go. We've got our 4 out of 4 for that one. So for the next question, we've got a 5 marker, 5 marks. We can still do as 1 paragraph. It's going to be a long paragraph, but it is a more efficient way of doing it than a mini essay. I would recommend doing a mini essay for a 6 or 7 marker, where you've got a 1 sentence introduction, 2 short paragraphs, which if it was a compare question would address each text in each paragraph. So text 1, text 2, and then a 1 sentence conclusion. Within each of those body paragraphs, you could have 2 to 3 pieces of evidence from each text. So that would be a 6 or 7 mark mini essay. But for this 5 marker, we're going to do a topic sentence and 4 sentences of analysis. And because it's a compare question, we're going to do 2 sentences of analysis on text 3 and then 2 sentences of analysis on text 4. Now for the topic sentence, I always like to start it with a word like whereas or whilst, because that forces you to immediately compare them and then you won't waste time. So we'll start with something like, whereas text 3 represents this element or this perspective, text 4 represents this perspective, okay? So we'll do that all in 1 sentence for a topic sentence, and then we'll do 2 on each. Let's go. Okay, so you can see here in the topic sentence, we've started with the word whereas to force the comparison. We say, whereas text 3 reveals an individual's appreciation. See how that's a type of perspective, an appreciation. So that's the specific link to the question. Of their natural surroundings. Notice how we don't just say surroundings, we say what type of surroundings, natural surroundings. That helps us give a specific answer for text 3. And then we say text 4, because whereas text 3 does that, text 4 represents a technological perspective. See again how it's linking to the question by breaking it down. So it's expanding on the word perspective that distracts the individual. Distracts. That's the word where you're really getting the mark here, because you're showing a clear difference. One person is appreciating it, one person is distracted. Make sure you have a look at the text, but you've basically got someone describing very vividly their perception of their environment, describing the sun, the sky, and so forth. All life amazes me. Great, we get it, you love it. And then in the photograph, you've got someone looking at a laptop screen that has nature on it, but they're ignoring the actual nature, the real world that's just outside, which has the same thing as the image, right? So they're distracted. They've got a distorted perspective. Great, we can gauge that pretty easily for this question. It might look hard because it's got two texts, but actually they were not the most difficult texts, in my opinion. Now, let's do our 2 sentences of analysis for the extract. 2 quick techniques to find in the extract. I mean, the first thing that popped out to me was the last sentence, all life amazes me. What is that? I think of mest is best. Mest, what's the S? Syntax. Short sentence, short syntax. There's my technique, done. What is it saying? All life amazes me. Great, this person has a very holistic, all life. I'm paying attention to those specific words. I'm not just gonna come up with some generic thing. I'm thinking about the word all. I'm zoom in on the words to get a specific insight. Otherwise you will just repeat the question. All life amazes me. Amazes, okay, amaze, wonder, got it. So all life amazes me, short syntax. It reveals the individual's overarching or underlying or something like that, holistic sense of wonder that they get from their appreciation of nature. Because they're present in nature, they are able to get a sense of wonder that is holistic and constant. This next sentence is super long. So this is elongated syntax. Because I'm going to do short syntax at the end, I won't also do it, but you could talk about the elongated syntax here. That's just a really, really long sentence. Obviously, if you're quoting it, you can just pick a few keywords from within it and just say that it's elongated syntax, don't quote the whole thing. But what I like here is the sky in front becoming pink and soft. It's like this gentle description, gentle image of the sky. You know, the sky becomes pink and soft. It feels like warm and inviting and gentle. So that is connecting with the human in that way, the individual in that way. They see the world as this welcoming place. They see nature as this welcoming place. So that's their perspective. They have this very positive perspective, but it's more than positive. They feel a sense of comfort and warmth, pink and soft, warmth. I'm thinking of words that relate to pink and soft, warmth. That's the word I'll use in my effect. All right, let's write in those 2 sentences of analysis. So for the first sentence, keep it simple. We have to establish which text we're talking about. In text 3, the visual image of the sky in front becoming pink and soft, short and sweet, suggests that the individual perceives their natural surroundings as a warm and inviting place. So that's the link to the question. And as a warm and inviting place, that is our specific insight. That's our specific breakdown of that. So you can see we're responding to the question in a specific way, and warm and inviting comes from pink and soft. Okay, so look for those direct links because then you say something specific. Okay, next sentence. Moreover, the short syntax, again, starting the sentence with the technique, all life amazes me. Now, I should have the full stop in there to show that it is a short sentence, so make sure to include the full stop in that case. Emphasizes the power of nature, emphasizes the power of, such a good phrase to force us to do the right thing here. The power of nature to do what? We have to fill in the blank now. To provide a constant, why do we say constant? Because it says all life, a constant sense of wonder. Why do I say wonder? Because it says amazes. You have to zoom in on specific words from the quote, think about synonyms and related words, and then use those in your explanation while also connecting it to the question. If you can do those 2 things, you'll get full marks every time. Okay, so of nature to provide a constant sense of wonder for the persona. Great, so that's their perspective. Now, we could use the word perspective or surroundings. I haven't used, I don't think, any of those keywords explicitly, so we probably should. Emphasizes the power of nature to provide a constant sense of wonder for the persona. Why don't we say this, just to be a little bit more clear as an example, to shape the persona's perspective with a constant sense of wonder, to enrich the persona's perspective with a constant sense of wonder. There we go. Okay, so don't worry if you don't get it perfect on the day. Obviously, nothing has to be perfect. You just have to cover these main elements. But the power of nature to enrich the postponer's perspective. Perfect. There's the link to the question, and clearly it's specific. All right, now we're going to do 2 sentences for the other text. It's going to have the contrast in view because it's got the image of the laptop, the person looking at the laptop, which has an image of nature, despite nature being right in front of them. So let's put 2 sentences together there. Contrast in. Because I want to contrast, I'll start with however. All right, so in this first sentence, we are starting with however, we're bringing in text 4, and we're saying the salience. Salience is always a good technique for a visual. I always think of secret chocolate sauce. Secret for S, chocolate C, sauce S. Salience, what's the thing that stands out in the image? Chocolate for C is contrast, and the final S in secret chocolate sauce is symbolism. So always think about those 3 things. You can find 3 quick techniques in every image if you think of your secret chocolate sauce for analyzing images. There you go. Now, salience of the laptop screen while the persona sits outside. So I give a little bit of context there. The persona's outside, the character's outside, but there is a laptop screen and it's salient, it's prominent. It's the thing our eyes are drawn to. That depicts the ability for technology, because laptop screen technology, to disrupt one's appreciation of their natural surroundings, okay? So we've compared them clearly and said, the ability for, notice how the ability for is like the power of, the ability for technology to disrupt one's appreciation of their natural surroundings. So that's the link to the question with the specific insight. The salience, now this is going to be the salience of the laptop screen. The of the laptop screen while the persona sits outside is the equivalent of a quote. It's like fleshing out that technique, the salience of this. You can't just say the salience, right? You have to describe what is salient. So that description of the visual feature for an image is the equivalent of a quote. Okay, great. Let's do our last one here. Okay, and for the last one, furthermore, instead of moreover, because we've already used that. Furthermore, the blurred background. Blurred background. Background's always a thing you can talk about with an image if it's important. The blurred background of the natural landscape demonstrates the power of modern technology, just to give a bit more of an edge there, because it's got all like the phone cables and everything, to distort our perspective of the natural world. Now the key word there is distort, because blurred, distort. See how I'm constantly looking at the words from the example that I've used to actually shape what I'm saying about it. So like in a quote, we zoom in on the word, blurred background, that makes me think of a distorted view. So blurred background as the technique, we say what is actually blurred there, a natural landscape, and it demonstrates the power of modern technology to distort our perspective of the modern world, okay? The distort bit is really where you get the mark, because we can see how that clearly connects to the blurred, and then we connect that to the perspective of the natural world, right? That it's distorted. The other one was about a disruption. Very similar points like disruption, distract. Maybe distract would even be stronger, but we use it in the topic sentence. But then distort is a little bit different, right? It's not just disruptive, it's actually distorting. We can't even appreciate it. So that works well there. So that's how you can get 5 out of 5 for question 3. No need for a link sentence. That's just going to chew up valuable time, and you'll probably end up repeating your topic sentence. On to the next. All right, question 4 for this paper was a 3-marker. Okay, so 3 marks, 3 sentences, 1 topic sentence, 2 sentences of analysis. You should be visualizing that straight away. You should be having a bit of a checklist as you go through the text and thinking, what do I actually need to find here to get the 3 out of 3 before moving on? Because you don't want to spend too long on the question. And the key words here, discomfort and joy. Analyze how Wilson represents the relationship between discomfort and joy. So we need to say one thing in our topic sentence about the relationship. We need to say what the relationship is. A lot of people make the mistake of just saying it's a positive relationship. No, don't say that. You just say how the 2 terms relate to each other without even saying the word relate. Okay, so we want to break down the discomfort and the joy, so provide something in addition to those 2, whether it's physical discomfort, spiritual discomfort, what type of discomfort, and what type of joy, or where does that joy come from. But what is the relationship? Does one of those things cause another one? Does one of those things prevent another one? Are they at odds with each other? So that's what you need to communicate in the topic sentence. We then need to have 2 sentences of analysis that then back up that point. And again, you can look at 2 different parts or sections of the text, in this case, a poem, to find 2 slightly different points so you're not just repeating yourself. Now, in terms of the relationship between the key terms, I always like to think of a cause and effect relationship. So which one causes the other one? Does discomfort create joy somehow? Or can you experience joy notwithstanding discomfort? I'm just brainstorming some things straight off the bat to think like what kind of thing I could say. But I do like a cause and effect one. So I'm probably going to look for something like discomfort can actually lead to joy, right? We don't want to say something causes something. Don't use that scientific language, but you effectively need to say that discomfort can bring about joy in some way, right? And we'll expand on each of those terms like we said, but that will be our topic sentence. So quickly looking at the poem, Lockley's Pylon. Now it does say that name at the bottom, it's very important to look at the footnotes here. Name of a bushwalking track. Okay, so we're in a bushwalking track. Keep that in mind. That's important to understand this poem. And don't worry if you don't understand every line or even what's going on overall. Just look to understand that vibe of it. Is it positive? Is it negative? Is there a bit of both? What's the significance of that? So the good thing is it's a relatively short poem here. Running hunched over and wet between thunderclaps and lightning. Okay, does that sound good or bad? I'm just looking at the start. I always like to try and find something straight away. Running hunched over and wet. That sounds really uncomfortable. You're running hunched over and wet. What type of discomfort is it? It's a physical discomfort. You're literally wet running through, I presume, because it said this is a bushwalking track, you're getting rained on and trying to run through this bushwalking track. Already we have this image of physical discomfort, okay? Great, so we've got that in our mind. Does it directly connect to joy? Not yet. So maybe we wouldn't just go straight in and take a quote from that first part unless we could also use something that connects to joy. So now we continue. On my path, emerging out of mist, symmetric blooms on hectic zigzag branches. Okay, I note something there. Emerging out of mist. Emerging out of mist. It's like a symbolic thing, right? Mist is like you can't really see the light through the tunnel, so to speak, right? It's all misty, you're getting rained on. But then there's these symmetric blooms of branches. That sounds quite positive, doesn't it? Something blooming, there's symmetry, there's a beauty coming out on this bushwalk, okay? So the idea straight away that we're getting is that emerging out of mist, emerging out of struggle, in this case physical discomfort, comes some kind of potential for joy because you can appreciate the beauty of nature, right? So you might say despite physical discomfort, but in this case, it's kind of like because you're in the rain, you're able to appreciate it more. And if you can actually persevere through that discomfort, then you can actually experience joy in appreciating the beauty of nature. Okay, I know I'm like stretching a lot here from just reading a few of those lines, but that's kind of what you need to do here. And then you need to make sure it's connecting to the question, which I have done so because I'm only ever looking at the text through the lens of the question. I'm only reading this with discomfort and joy in my mind, so to speak. Okay, so we've got something there. I think emerging out of mist, symmetric blooms. Now, what's the technique? Visual imagery seems to work there, natural imagery, right? Mist, something you can see, and symmetric blooms of zigzag branches. So on hectic zigzag branches, I should say. So clearly there's some visual imagery going on, and that seems to relate to the idea of there being a beauty that can come from a discomfort, some kind of symbolic value there. Great. Burnt black and hung with crystal beaded spider webs. And then it says, yawning above, great waves of half-swallowed sandstone. Notice the enjambment, by the way, here. Enjambment is something that often comes up in the poems that they select for these papers, and it's just where there are no commas or no kind of punctuation at the end of the lines. See even the first line how it says running, one word, hunched over and wet. See how there's no comma right at the end of that part just there? There's no comma, it goes straight into the next line. When that happens, that's enjambment, and that's a technique you could use if relevant. So yawning above, great waves of half-swallowed sandstone. Yawning above, it's personifying the environment. So the environment is coming to life. Personification coming to life. See how those things connect? Amazing. So you could experience joy at witnessing nature come to life despite the physical discomfort you might be experiencing. Great, there's another effect. We've literally just said one as we brainstormed that. Yawning gave me the idea of personification. Personification of the environment made me think that it's coming alive because that's literally what personifying is doing. And that makes sense here because this person's running on this bush track and yet they're seeing the environment come alive. That could give them a sense of joy. Let's keep reading. Those things pull at me. Beside the track, fresh, ips, pogon, whatever. We go down and look at it. It's a shrub. Notice I'm being deliberately dismissive here because like on the day of the exam, if I saw that, I wouldn't really worry about that. I would look at the definition for sure to make sure I'm not missing the overall point, but I'm probably not going to focus on that for my techniques. And it doesn't matter, I don't need to. Like small yellow fireworks. Interesting. Like small yellow fireworks. If you see the word like or as, it's probably a simile. So you've got a simile here. The nature is like fireworks. Wow. So despite that physical discomfort, you get to experience this. Now, what are we thinking? Fireworks, explosive. explosive display of nature. Look at that, amazing. Fireworks, explode, explosive, explosive display. Fireworks are an explosive display. It's an explosive display of nature. See what we did there? We're zooming in on the words of the quote, and then we're taking that meaning away from it by thinking about related terms and synonyms. It's that easy once you start getting used to it. Hauling outwards. Minute opalescent, which is opalescent, milky brightness, great word. Pearls potted inside. So you got all this imagery of all of nature here on this bushwalk. And then it comes, this is the key thing right at the end. Soaked with rain, scared. Okay, you felt scared, you're soaked, you're emotionally uncomfortable, scared. It's not just physical discomfort. Now for a 3 mark, if you wanted to bring in the last point, an emotional discomfort, emotive language, scared, stumbling and breathless for one moment, this epiphany moment, this realization of what's around me, this kind of lucid moment of awareness about the beauty of nature. I am immeasurably happy. Okay, I am immeasurably happy. Let's go to our friend Mest is best for techniques here. I am, that's high modality. They're very sure that they are immeasurably happy, not I might be immeasurably happy, which would be low modality. So you've got high modality, I am immeasurably happy. Emotive language, I'm immeasurably happy. It's emotive, right? Wow, okay, they're scared, stumbling, immeasurably. It feels emotional, right? It's evoking something in the reader to read it. So you've also got the final kind of line there. It's not quite short syntax because, again, there's all that enjambment. It's actually, the sentence begins up with soaked with rain. But again, we've got that physical discomfort contrasted with that realization of the beauty of nature. And then it culminates, this whole thing ends with this immeasurably happy description. So we only need to pick 2 things out of this. I would pick something up around the mist section, like earlier. So remember, try and find something early and then something at the end. So I like the out of mist symmetric blooms visual imagery. And then at the end, I like the contrast in emotive language of scared and immeasurably happy to show that despite emotional discomfort, you can still feel the heightened sense of joy when you appreciate the beauty of nature. Done. So let's put that all together. All right, so I've got one topic sentence here that I think works well. So Wilson represents, I'm just using the words of the question, analyze how Wilson represents. Wilson represents the potential, I like that potential to the power of, the capacity for. Remember that phrase kind of is a great phrase to lead into any topic sentence to help you then say something specific about the key words of the question. So Wilson represents the potential to experience profound joy. Notice profound joy. I'm thinking about that immeasurable happiness point. To experience profound joy in nature. Notice how around the word of the question, like here's the exact link to the question, joy, but that's not going to get points. What's going to get points is profound joy in nature. So you're actually expanding on the type of joy and when the joy is experienced, despite the physical discomfort, the physical discomfort. So again, discomfort's in there. We've got to use the actual word of the question to engage with it and make sure the marker knows we are responding to this. But notice the words around the key words, right? Profound joy in nature, despite the physical discomfort that it can create. So the despite there is actually really key. The despite is getting at the relationship, that one can get in way of the other, that nature can cause discomfort, but also joy, okay? One other topic sentence that I'll show you now is here. So Winston represents how physical discomfort in nature can heighten one's sense of joy by revealing its beauty. That's another one. So see how these are clearly showing a relationship, that physical discomfort can heighten. It causes more joy because it allows you to appreciate the beauty of nature more, because you're so uncomfortable that you then see something so beautiful. That contrast creates that appreciation. You don't need to think about it that deeply, of course, but you need to show some specific relationship. So there are 2 examples. Let's get rid of that one. Now let's just do those 2 pieces of analysis. All right, for our first sentence of analysis, we can get straight into the technique here. So the visual imagery in emerging out of mist, because it's talking about mist, it's visual, symmetric blooms, right? So we've got these symmetric blooms. There's a symmetry there. There's a beauty to it. There's a perfection to it. The visual imagery is the technique. There's our quote. Now that symbolizes, I've used symbolizers quite deliberately here because I think that mist is quite symbolic for this persona's experience more generally. It symbolizes the capacity for. Notice the language there again. I love to use those phrases, the capacity for, the potential for, the ability for, the power of. Those things all force you to say something more specific versus just listing keywords or repeating the question. So symbolizes the capacity for natural beauty to arise after temporary experiences of discomfort, unlocking feelings of joy for the persona. Notice the extension here to connect it to joy. I really want to hit joy and discomfort in every sentence. Unlocking feelings of joy for the persona despite the harsh conditions of their walk. Okay, so it still says the despite again, but it's a little bit more specific now. It addresses the fact they're on a walk. That's great, that's all you need. The point here is you can have beauty arise after temporary discomfort. Why do I say temporary? Mist, it's like half there. So mist has got this connotation of a temporary or fleeting kind of discomfort where you can't see what's at the end of it, but then there's this joy that's unlocked when you see the beauty on the other side, when you just go with it. So look, that's just an interpretation. I think you can get away with that one. So let's go with that. The capacity for natural beauty to arise after temporary discomfort. Again, always bringing it back to the question. I only care about those key words here. And then unlocking feelings of joy despite the harsh conditions of their walk. Okay, that a little bit of extra context there, but that's how you're gonna get the mark there. And for our last sentence here, the second piece of evidence that's been analyzed, indeed the contrasting emotive language of scared and immeasurably happy reveals how a joyful appreciation of nature can be found in experiences of emotional discomfort. Okay, look at that, emotive language, and not just emotive language here, contrasting, because it said scared and immeasurably happy at the end. So you could have just said emotive language, but I liked contrasting here because I noticed that scared and immeasurably happy do contrast with one another. So scared, immeasurably happy, and then how a joyful appreciation of nature, because immeasurably happy, that's the joy, joyful appreciation of nature, can be found in experiences of emotional discomfort. Again, scared is an emotion, emotional discomfort. I connect that scared point to the question by actually saying emotional discomfort, not just repeating the question and saying discomfort. You're not going to get marks if you simply say the words of the question. You have to expand on them and actually say something specific, which you can see all of these are doing. So how do you actually make a proper point? You use phrases like it reveals the power of, the capacity for, those kind of things. And then how do you ensure you're not just repeating the words by themselves and sounding a little bit repetitive? Even still, you expand on them by asking yourself what type of discomfort is relevant here? Scared, emotional discomfort. Always think about words like emotional, psychological, intellectual, spiritual, governmental, political, social. All of those like all words that end in AL, they're really good ones just to have as go-tos and practice using them before keywords like discomfort, because it'll open your mind to different possibilities when you are quickly having to respond to a question and you want to find a way to expand and not just repeat the words again and again. Okay, so last question now, 5 marker here, another 5 marker. 5 markers are very common in the section 1s. Occasionally you'll get a 6 or 7 mark, which we said is a little bit different structurally to a 5 marker, because I would approach that as a mini essay, and I've already spoken about how to do that and have other videos on that as well on the channel. But in terms of the 5 marker here, we're going to treat it as one big paragraph. It's just going to have a topic sentence and 4 sentences of analysis. I'm not going to worry about a link sentence at the end. It tends to be repetitive and not add any value to your response. So let's aim for 5 marks, 5 sentences, but they've got to be high quality to get the 5. One topic sentence that really does hit the question and it expands on it. It says what the dynamics actually are. It might refer to some kind of language generally that's used because the language is actually in the question. And then we've got to have 4 pieces of evidence that are never repeating each other in terms of what they're saying. Now, that's a challenge, right? You need 4 pieces of evidence and you're not comparing 2 texts. So you have to find 4 things from the one text and you can't repeat yourself in any of them. So what I would suggest doing here, and what we're going to do, is we're going to look for 2 key ideas that we can almost break the piece into, like 2 different focal points. And I like to just look at the start of it and the end of it. I like to look at the first half and the second half, and that goes into our strategy generally of just zooming in on parts of the beginning, zooming in on parts of the end, trying to come up with different points because they're at different parts of the text, so they're probably focusing on slightly different things. So find your evidence from there. Let's try and split our response into 2 pieces of evidence on one related point and 2 pieces of evidence on another point that maybe comes from the second half of the piece. So let's see how we go with that. So before we look at the text, let's just quickly hone in on that question. assess how Diaz's use of language is a key word, illuminates the dynamics within the Brevoort family. So family dynamics within the family, that's the key part of this question, but also it explicitly mentioned the use of language. So it kind of wants us to refine our techniques just to specific language features, types of language. You're always doing that anyway, even if it didn't say it, but we are probably going to want to reference that as well in the topic sentence and try and find a general categorization of the type of language to help with our point. So language and family dynamics, that's what we're looking at when we go through this text. Now, if you like, pause the video right now, have a quick read yourself, have one read through the text, and then we can break it down quickly together. All right, so looking at this, it starts off, it does seem to have a kind of split to it in terms of the ideas. If you just scan through it, don't worry if you're not understanding everything, but if we read the start, it seems to be more about this family's reputation, how important reputation is to them. That seems to come up. Just read the first line. They were an old local family whose fortune had not kept up with their name. Now, if you don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. You could still look at other parts to get a general sense of what's going on here. But if someone's fortune, their wealth, doesn't keep up with their name, it means that they are not as wealthy as they want to be seen. Okay, they want to be seen as being wealthier than they actually are. Their fortune had not kept up with their name. So reputation versus the reality of their financial situation is what seems to be going on from the first sentence. It had taken 3 generations of failed politicians and novelists to reduce them to a state of dignified precariousness. Ooh. Now, if you didn't understand what dignified precariousness is, don't worry. Again, you have to skip through the bits you don't understand. This is what will separate the students who get like a 10 or 12 out of 20 and who get 18, 19, 20 out of 20. It's the ones who persevere past sentences that they don't fully get and just zoom in on the parts they do understand. You can still get full marks even if you don't understand a lot of the text. You just keep scanning through, find things that make sense to you. Now, dignified precariousness, if you did pick up on it, it's basically a really useful kind of oxymoron. I actually quite like it and I might use it because it's dignified. Dignified, you know what dignified is? Respectable, honorable. Precariousness. Something's precarious. It's uncertain. It's unstable. So there's an oxymoron there. There's 2 words next to each other that are seemingly opposite. So dignified, precarious. Dignified's great. Precarious, uncertain, unstable, not good. So to me, this is getting at the conflict between how this family wants to be perceived and the reality in which they actually exist. So they want to be seen as this high-class family, it seems, dignified, but the situation that they're living in is actually quite precarious. Their fortune can't keep up. So they're poorer than they make themselves out to be, is what's happening. So pride, reputation. So any of those terms would be great. If they're coming to mind, lean into that. That's going to be part of this family dynamic. If we keep reading on, I think something that's important is the relationship. Because it said family dynamics, I'm just looking for a couple of different dynamics. And we're very deliberately looking for that because that was in the question. It's suggesting that that's something prominent here. It says that between the husband and the wife, Leopold and Catherine, it says, if their gatherings were so successful, it was because they achieved a rare balance between lightness. Catherine had a knack for making others feel like gifted conversationalists, and gravitas. Leopold was widely acknowledged as one of the local intellectual and moral authorities. So see there the dynamic between them? If things went well, which was rare, it's because of the complementary dynamic. That's what just came to mind there. Complementary dynamic between Catherine and Leopold. So they have a complementary dynamic in that they're able to uphold their reputation when they utilize their specific strengths as people. But the problem is that's a pretty superficial kind of relationship because they're complementing each other to present this fake image to people that they live in wealth when they're not actually that wealthy. Okay, so what's interesting technically for me in terms of language is the use of parentheses, brackets. Brackets are parentheses. Notice how it has the brackets, Catherine was this, Leopold was this. It's characterizing them within the parentheses to help us understand their complementary dynamic in trying to preserve this misleading reputation. Okay, and then moving on from there, Mr. Brevoort had penned 2 volumes on political philosophy. Embittered by the perfect silence that met his work, he turned to his young daughter. So like people weren't appreciating his work. He turned to his young daughter and took her schooling in his hands. Okay, see, there's a shift here. See how that first part, this is what we wanted to see for this 5 marker. The first paragraph is about the dynamic between husband and wife. There's the family dynamic. They're trying to uphold this false reputation, okay? And then it shifts to a dynamic, a relationship between Mr. Prevost, right, Leopold, seemingly, and his daughter. So the father-daughter relationship comes into play now, and that's the one that's going to give more fulfillment. So there's the contrast. That's how we're going to split our paragraph structurally. This is so important. I know we're looking at this, but we always think back to our 5-mark structure, right? We've got a topic sentence, we've got a dynamic there, we've got a new dynamic here, and we can split up the evidence, which is going to make it easier for you because you're not going to repeat yourself. 2 and 2. So 2 are going to be on the dynamic between Leopold and Catherine, dignified precariousness, the parentheses, there's our 2 techniques. And then we're going to find 2 things here with the father-daughter relationship to contrast that. So let's see what we can find. And with this, because the language here is quite sophisticated, there's not a ton of imagery, it's not like a poem where there's just techniques galore. Let's not make our lives too hard, right? Always think about MEST, think about modality, think about emotive language, think about syntax. Let's find some simple techniques that will work here. So straight away, I'm just like skimming through this. He's having these experiences with his daughter. They would go for long walks. They're looking at tadpoles and cool stuff, moon's halo, awesome. The last sentence, that's all we really need here. Leopold had never experienced this sort of joy. Amazing. So family dynamic, how does this relate to family dynamic? The father-daughter connection that he has, the father-daughter dynamic, right? The father-daughter dynamic here brings about a more authentic or a superior sense of joy compared to that other dynamic that he had with his wife in playing pretend and trying to appear wealthy. So we go from the superficial to the authentic. And if you didn't come up with that, that's fine. I'm kind of thinking aloud here, and under the time pressure of an exam, it's a little bit different, but there's something superficial to something authentic. If not, you just say there was a different dynamic between Leopold and his wife because it was all about hosting people and looking good. This one is about a true emotional connection. Anything like that would work here. But I like this short syntax here. It's also Leopold had never experienced this sort of joy. We can actually look at high modality there. Leopold had never. It shows how much of a contrast it is. But also, we could think about it in terms of the short syntax. So you pick short syntax, high modality, or both. They can work. Now, let's find something else. Skim through the rest of it. Okay, it's more about how he's trying to teach her things. Great, great, great. Again, I love to just zoom in at the end of a text, see if I can find something there. The first 2 or 3 years of her studies under her father's tutelage, right, like him teaching her under his instruction, would remain the happiest in her life. And even in time, the details and contours of these memories faded, the general feeling of excitement and plenitude, abundance, remained as bright and vivid as ever in her mind. Beautiful, beautiful finish. That's all we need. We've got it. Leopold felt this sense of joy he'd never experienced, and now we have the general feeling of excitement and plenitude remained as bright and vivid as ever in her mind for the daughter. So it's a reciprocated feeling. Amazing. We could even bring in reciprocated. But the technique there, emotive language. You've got all this emotive language, feeling of excitement and plenitude, bright and vivid. Wow, we can really feel how much satisfaction, emotional satisfaction she got from that relationship with her father. So great, we've got something to say about all of this. We've split up our evidence into 2 kind of halves, in that we're going to talk about the Leopold and the wife, and then we've grabbed something from each of the other 2 paragraphs in relation to the father-daughter. Now, what do we do for the topic sentence? Let's go back to our question. Assess how Diaz's use of language illuminates the dynamics. Okay, what was it about the language? There was oxymorons, there was parentheses, there were brackets, there was high modality language, there was emotive language. But if you were to say something about language, in fact here I think because it's so diverse in terms of the type of language, I wouldn't try and list anything. I wouldn't try and specify. I want to keep this as simple as possible. So let's play it safe here, and we can say that the use of language is important. Language is used as a means to contrast these dynamics. I think that could be a good thing to say, but don't try and specify all the types of language. You're literally going to do that in your evidence after 4 times. So play it safe here with language. It's a bit of a kind of a red herring in that it's not something you should expand on in the topic sentence in this scenario. So for this topic sentence, we've got Diaz uses language. Notice we're not going to expand on the language, but we're going to say uses language to contrast the dynamics between husband and wife with father and daughter. So we've been very specific there, and you don't have to do that, but I find that that would really kind of almost guarantee the mark if you could say what the contrasting dynamics are, if you chose to do it in the way in which we did, which is what I would always recommend. If you can find that split for a 5 marker or a 6 and 7, always try and split it up into 2 parts, and then extend on that by saying something about them. What is the difference? As one relationship is superficial, whereas the other is authentic. It's such a nice, clean sentence. You don't have to have it that clean on the day, but this is just an example of how concise you can be if you can find the right words. If you can't find the right words, just say what you are trying to say in the best way possible. It doesn't matter if it doesn't sound sophisticated. This isn't even that sophisticated, but it's tight. I've got the benefit of like typing this up and obviously thinking about it as I do it. So keep that in mind. But the point is to be specific, and the point is not to worry too much about the language part. So now we're going to do the first two sentences of analysis based on that husband-wife dynamic. Okay, so for the first sentence of analysis in relation to the couple here, the husband and wife, we're going to say the oxymoronic language. Now, normally I would say the oxymoron, but because the key word of the question was language, it actually said language, didn't just say how does it represent the family dynamics. It said how is language used. I'm just going a bit more out of my way to get language in there. So oxymoronic language, the oxymoronic language in dignified precariousness, because again, they're conflicting, they're contrasting, illuminates the Brevoort family's attempt to maintain a high status image despite struggling financially, creating an unstable dynamic between Leopold and Catherine. Okay, so you can see how it really leaned into that contrast between the status, dignified, and the unstable dynamic, precarious. Notice all of our elements here. We've got the oxymoronic language, that's the technique. We've also linked to the question there. We've got a quote. We said that it's about a conflict between maintaining a status and struggling financially. That's the specific insight that's breaking down what that actually means. And then we've linked it again to the question by saying that creates an unstable dynamic. Notice the type of dynamic. We don't just say dynamic, we say unstable dynamic. You've got to give more than the word itself that's in the question. Now, in the next sentence, we talk about the parentheses, the brackets that are used in that same first paragraph, because this is our second and final piece of evidence for this dynamic. And we're talking about how Leopold and Catherine are actually quite different. Moreover, the use of parentheses to compare Catherine's lightness with Leopold's gravitas. Now, that's an example of how you can weave in the single word quotes to make it flow, but you don't have to do that. Reveals their incompatibility as a couple. Incompatibility. See, that's an incompatible dynamic. I should be saying that, shouldn't I? Incompatibility is great. Incompatible dynamics better, because it's easy for the marker to see how I am linking to the question, and I'm clearly being specific, not repeating, because I've got the incompatible. Great. And then we've added this extra bit, as it is rare, this is how you can weave in a couple of other quotes, as it is rare for them to balance when trying to uphold their reputation. Okay, so it doesn't quite work out for them when they're trying to do that. Notice as well how I haven't quoted the full brackets. I've said parentheses, but not actually quoted the brackets because they're large quotes, right? What I've done instead is put in the quotes that come just before the parentheses that the parentheses are actually capturing. So you can still do that if you do it the right way. Otherwise, you could just quote both the parentheses, but it's just going to be a lot of words. So this is the way I would deal with that. Now we've got to get the two sentences for the other dynamic, the father-daughter one that is contrasting. All right, so for the third sentence of analysis here, we're going to start with however, because we're going to contrast those two dynamics. However, the high modality language, notice again how I'm always using language in the techniques. I've specifically looked for those things so we can really hit that part of the question, right? So we've still got our technique there, great. And we say the high modality language in, then we have the quote, Leopold had never experienced this sort of joy, emphasizes how his adventures with his daughter, because it had just previously, and have a look at the sentence before it to get context, it had previously said that they were marveling at all the wonders of the world, looking at the sky, the moon. Great. So from that, I pulled out adventures or experiences, you could say, in nature or just kind of playfulness. That created a more fulfilling dynamic. Great. That's all you need to say, because you've said what created the dynamic, what is the dynamic, and what he got from it. It's a more fulfilling one. It's a clear comparison there. So the more fulfilling is the bit where you are really getting the marks, but also the adventures with his daughter creating that is also going way beyond the question, right? We've hit the dynamic here, but look at all the expansion. Look at how we've actually provided a meaningful point. We've said this has led to this, cause and effect. I always have cause and effect in my mind to make these points. And finally, we can say similarly, because we're going to talk about the similar feelings that were conveyed about the daughter, because they were just easier techniques to find here. And imagine you're in the rush of an exam, it's your last question, you just want to go with things you can see straight away. Similarly, the emotive language Notice how throughout this whole thing, it's just techniques at the start. You're not gonna lose marks for doing that. You will gain marks to do it because you'll get through more of the paper and you'll be more succinct in your answers. So I definitely recommend that strategy. Then we get the quote in. This one's a little bit longer to capture everything we need. Reveals the emotional abundance. Now, the general feeling of excitement and plenitude remained as bright and vivid as ever in her mind. So this was describing the daughter's feelings during that period of their life, or of her life. And for me, that kind of was speaking to an abundance of emotions, right? So that's why I'm using emotional abundance, plenitude, right? Reveals the emotional abundance, not just the emotion, that's too vague. Say something specific, there it is. Now, she experienced that as a result of her dynamic with her father? No, that's repeating the question, except that we've said it's a dynamic with the father. We haven't said what type. We do need to always say the type. That's how you're going to get the marks. It's an authentic one, right? It's an authentic dynamic with her father. We're also adding that in to be more specific than the question. And boom, you have the 5 out of 5. You have the 20 out of 20. That's how you can get full marks in section 1. I hope that has helped. Good luck with all of your exams, especially your section 1 exams. Now that you've watched this, let me know if you've got any questions. Make sure you subscribe and share the channel, and check out jedl.com for any resources on this stuff. If you want to see more full mark exemplars, full breakdowns, text-specific analysis, and you want to get some of your work marked by us, marked by the team, marked by Jedi, then jump onto jedl.com. Otherwise, see you all soon.